Hey guys, we're going to go on and pick up with video number 2. With video number 1, if you remember from earlier, we looked at the different constitutional principles, the idea of separation of powers, the idea of checks and balances, the idea of a representative republic. And then the last bit was federalism. And we're going to hit on that again. And that's what the entire unit is about, federalism, the sharing of power between the states and the federal government. First, let's look at the different categories of powers, or the different types of powers. We have a power called enumerated powers. Enumerated powers are also called delegated powers or expressed powers. They're the exact same thing, just different names. The word enumerated means listed. Same thing with delegated. If you delegate something, you specifically tell someone what to do. Or if something is expressed, it's shown. And so enumerated powers are powers that are specifically given to the national government. This is important. This is found in Article 1, Section 8. And I have my handy-dandy pocket constitution we'll look at in just a second. Another type of power is reserved powers. Reserved powers are powers that are reserved or given to the states. And we know in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, it says that any power not specifically delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states. So anything that's not listed in the Constitution as a power of the federal government is a power of the states, and we call those reserved powers. There are some powers that the federal government and state governments both have, and these are called concurrent at the same time. And so these are powers shared by both the national and state governments. Article 1, Section 8, if we look at it, you can pause in just a second and take a look at it. It lists all sorts of different powers of Congress. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, to borrow money, to establish uniform rules of naturalization, so how to become a citizen, to coin money, punish counterfeiters, to establish post offices, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, so to have more courts than just the Supreme Court, to declare war, and we keep going, to provide and maintain a navy, and then that catch-all number 18, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Article 1, Section 8, number 18. Pause it, read it, and then come back to me. Now that you're back, this is the necessary and proper clause. This gives the federal government another type of power, and that power is called implied powers. Implied, if you think about that word, if you imply something, you don't specifically say it, but you know it needs to be done, or everybody knows that you're saying it. So implied powers are not specifically stated in the Constitution, but they are necessary in Congress, or necessary for Congress to carry out their enumerated powers. For instance, one of the first power of Congress is to lay and collect taxes. So they have the power to do that. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that Congress has the power to set up the IRS, but it's kind of assumed or implied that you need a tax collecting agency to do that. That's just one example of an implied power. And your homework hit on this. If we continue on, if we look at Article 1, Section 9, these are powers forbidden to Congress. So we call these denied powers. So the Constitution specifically lists things that Congress cannot do. They cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus, no bill of attainder, no ex post facto law. Ex post facto means after the fact. You can't make something illegal retroactively. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported. So no tax on exports is a denied power. No title of nobility. The president or Congress can't make someone a lord or a lady or a duke or a duchess. Pause it. Read through Article 1, Section 9. These are denied powers. And then we have Article 1, Section 10, which are denied state powers. No state shall enter into a treaty. No state shall coin money, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender. No, they cannot pass a bill of attainder, an ex post facto law. Cannot tax imports to their state. No state shall have a navy. So these are denied state powers. Article 1, Section 10. 8, 9, and 10 all deal with federalism. They're saying this is what the federal government can do, this is what they can't do, here's what the states can and can't do. And so this is important, and you should go back and read again these denied, reserved, denied, implied, and enumerated powers. We're going to hit this in an assignment as well. But those are the different types of powers. Let's look at federalism in the Constitution. We know, once again, federalism is sharing power between a central government and regional governments, in this case, states. As I mentioned, Article 1, Section 8, Article 1, Section 9, Article 1, Section 10. These list the powers. 8 is enumerated powers and implied powers, thanks to Article 1, Section 8, number 18. Number 9 is denied powers to the federal government, and number 10 is denied powers to the states. Now let's look at Article 4. We're just scroll, keep going. Article 4, which we talked about in Unit 1. Article 4 is the full faith and credit clause. This is the relationship among the states, what the states have to do to each other. The privileges and immunities clause as well, that you have to treat people of each state equally. So we've hit this, and this deals with federalism, how states should deal with each other. Now let's go to Article 6, the supremacy clause. Remember, the framers wanted to make sure that the national government was supreme. There has to be a final answer, and it can't be each individual state. So they put in Article 1, Section 6, that says, this Constitution, the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. So this tells us, with federalism, that the national government is the final say. Now, if we go to the Ninth Amendment, it says, the enumeration in this Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. So what does this mean, the Ninth Amendment? It says just because some rights aren't listed in this Constitution doesn't mean we don't have them. And so this deals with federalism because it says the federal government just can't take away rights just because they're not listed in the Constitution. Here's the biggie for the 10th Amendment. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively. This is where we get reserved powers. Reserved powers, 10th Amendment. Anything that's not listed in this Constitution as a federal government power is a state power. So I say it again. Anything not mentioned in this Constitution as a federal power and not prohibited to the states is a state power. So the 10th Amendment is reserved powers. So this is where we can find federalism in the Constitution. This was an essay question from Unit 1. And we're just adding on to it. We're explaining it a little bit more. You may see this exact same question again on the Unit 2 essay. Hint, hint. So with the structure of federalism, we have the expressed powers or delegated powers. We have the implied powers, thanks to the necessary and proper clause. I gave the example of the IRS, but there's many others that our assignments will discuss. We also have inherent powers. Inherent is what I like to call natural powers. Powers that the national government has just because they're the national government. What's the best example of an inherent power? Diplomacy. Talking with other nations. Doesn't it just make sense, or isn't it natural that if you're the federal government or the national government, that you would communicate and deal with other national governments? Yeah, it's not mentioned really in the Constitution because it's just assumed, or it's inherent, it's natural. We also have reserved powers, which are state powers. Then we have denied powers to the states and denied powers of the national government. So you can see federalism is laid out in different chunks all throughout the Constitution. 8, Article 1, 8, 9, 10, the Fourth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the Fourth Article 4 and Article 6, and the Ninth Amendment and the 10th Amendment. So it's all spread throughout saying you can do this, but you can't do that. Who has the final say? Article 6, the Sixth Amendment. And so it really lays out who does what. And that's federalism, sharing power. We have all these powers, and the Constitution is divvying them up. With states, the framers knew that there were so many other issues to deal with. And so that's why we included the 10th Amendment, that we wanted the federal government to have power and to have the final say. But there's some things that the states needed to do, like managing elections, laws, dealing with deeds like contracts, records. And so the framers just said anything that's not a federal power is a state power. And this is where we get the idea of limited government, because the federal government can only do these things that are listed in the Constitution. Everything else belongs to the people, to the states. And it was really important for the anti-federalists, for the skeptics, for the pro-states people to have the 10th Amendment, because then they could fall back on it. They could say, you know what, the federal government's trying to do this. It's not listed in the Constitution. And so it has to belong to the states, because that's what the Constitution orders us to do, that if it's not a federal power, it's a state power. What about taxes, you say? It says Article 1, Section 8, Number 1 says Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes. Does that mean the states can't collect taxes? No. There's a lot of overlapping powers. There's a lot of questionable powers that the states and federal governments have done. We can look at this one example, and we're going to look at a court case at the end of the unit that deals with marriage. We know that marriage is not listed in the Constitution, so it's left up to a state power. That's a judicial record of the state. And so that's going to fall under Article 4, the full faith and credit clause. Most states, generally speaking, honored marriage licenses from other states, because that's what they said that should happen. We know, starting about 20 years ago, some states started to allow same-sex marriages. Well, some states said we are not going to recognize these marriage licenses because we don't believe in same-sex marriages. And we even added amendments, state constitutional amendments that forbid same-sex marriages. And so we have this question, this gray area. Article 4 says we have to honor every other state's licenses and records. But we have the 10th Amendment that says, it's a state power. So what do we do? How do we solve that? And it wasn't until just about 5 or 6 years ago, the Supreme Court said, in this case, Obergefell versus Hodges, that states must honor same-sex licenses. And so people consider this court case the legalization of same-sex marriages. But there's that questionable area. And if you think about it, it's more than just same-sex marriages. It's so many other records and issues. Each state has to honor every other state's records, but the 10th Amendment says that each state can do what they want when it comes to reserved powers. What if one state would allow, we can say, We can continue on. 4 people to get married. What do we do then? Is that does that fall under the same topic as same-sex marriages, or does it fall along the same line? And would states be required to honor that marriage license from another state? It's a very questionable thing, this idea of reserved powers, this uncertainty. Because if one state allows it, does that mean all the states have to recognize it? There's a lot of uncertainty here. And then we have with these overlapping powers. Education is not mentioned in the Constitution. So it's a state power, it's a reserve power. But why do we have the Department of Education at the federal level if it's a state power? Law enforcement's not mentioned in the Constitution, so it should be a reserve power. But why do we have the FBI and the U.S. Marshals? Elections are left up to the states. That's mentioned in the Constitution. But then why do we have a federal election committee? And so these are some really good questions, really good things to ponder. That is the federal government doing more than what it should? Some people say yes, some people say no. It's just a matter of your political beliefs. We're going to stop here because what we're going to be looking at in the next video is how the government changed over time and how the courts defined federalism. And how in the world did we ever get the Department of Education and the Federal Election Committee and the FBI? How did that come out if they're reserved powers? So we're going to be looking at federalism through the years. So it's kind of like a walk back through history.